Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So nice to see everybody here today. Wednesday, the 16th of January, right? Yeah, 16th of January. And so Bhante, it was the afternoon, and Bhante sent me a kind of message on Facebook Messenger. It's actually thanks to Bhante that I'm on Facebook, by the way. I didn't even have a Facebook account, even when it started. Even when I was a layperson, I had no Facebook account. I was like, I don't want people knowing what I'm up to on the internet. But it was thanks to Bhante's influence. This is the way that people do things now. And so he sent me a kind of message, and he said, Atulo, look at my timeline. Kind of. And so I went on there, and he had written a blurb, and said, Atulo is filling in for me today. So you can come meditate with Bhante Atulo today. And interestingly enough, today is actually also the Memorial Day for Venerable Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah was a very famous teacher. I think many people here may have heard of him. And it was actually my good fortune to start my monastic life at a Ajahn Chah monastery. And so today in Thailand, they are going to be doing a kind of a very big ceremony. I think this is the culmination of about a week's worth of ceremonies in honor of Ajahn Chah. And it's something to see. I was just talking with Curtis that this is probably one of the social wonders of the world. Curtis recommended that that phrase be copyrighted. He came up with it. But there's probably 1,000 monks or more go to this gathering over the course of 7 days, and more than 10,000 lay people. And all these people are fed for free, kind of through donations. And people meditate and chant the whole time. And I had the good fortune to go one time, and it was probably one of the most moving experiences in my life. You kind of been to a sports stadium, and there's like 10,000 people like, go Toronto FC, kind of everybody gets caught up in that. But this was 10,000 people keeping the 8 precepts, which I'd never experienced before. And there was a couple times hearing these people chant, just a huge quantity of people. I almost started to cry. It was that moving, It was just an incredible experience. You have to be there. You can't. It's hard to describe. And the culmination, I think, is today, where they circumambulate Ajahn Chah's stupa, which is in the center of the monastery. And so I think it's actually like 11,000 people will circumambulate this. It starts with the monks. They all come with flowers, and they lay flowers in front of Ajahn Chah's stupa. Then they circumambulate it 3 times. And then they head off. And that's the culmination. I think the night before, there's all-night Dhamma talks, all-night kind of meditation. So it's quite a tradition. And so both of these things, kind of Bhante, for me, I have a lot of gratitude to Bhante. He's been very welcoming, just kind of ended up here by chance in the Toronto area, maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now. And I didn't know really anybody, and my friend introduced me to Bhante. And Bhante's been extremely supportive in just about every way. And kind of, he didn't even know me, really. Actually, I think I said this robe actually comes from Bhante. There was a time when you can get most things in Canada, but robes are actually really hard to get. Like they don't sell them. Like most of the monastic things that a monk would need, you actually can't get them. So unless you're going to sew them yourself, which is an option but takes a long time, then you have to come to a temple to get them. And so almost every time that I come to the temple, Bhante asks me, is there anything you need? You know, I think he asked me it like maybe a couple times, like yesterday, last week when I was here, before I went to sleep. He was like, okay, Attalo, is there anything you need? I said, can I have the key to the treadmill? I'd like to do some walking. And he said, well, it's a little bit late, but is there anything else you need? And so this is one of the things. It's kind of Ajahn Chah Memorial Day. There's various people in our life who are there for us, who help us. And kind of Western culture is very kind of, it's got many wonderful qualities. Kind of, it's got this quality of independence to it. Kind of that people need to strike out on their own and to make their own way and to try to find their place in the world. And all this is tied up with this concept of merit in the West. In other words, you get to a good position in your life because you work hard for it, not because you know somebody. And there's goodness to this. There's a value to this. It's kind of, it doesn't depend on your creed or class or whatever it is. You have the opportunity, living in a kind of egalitarian society like this, to advance. To kind of live your material dreams. And it's almost taken for granted now, but maybe 300 or 400 years ago, this was something very wonderful. It's taken for granted that we have this opportunity. If you're born in Canada, you can become a doctor, you can become a lawyer, you can become a prime minister, and it doesn't really depend on your birth. But this is actually something revolutionary. So there's this wonderful side to this quality of independence, this quality of merit. But there can also be, like any qualities, there can be points where they're over-applied. And it's kind of the interesting thing about many wholesome qualities, is that they're good up to a point, and then past a point they start to produce a kind of pathology, kind of negative aspects in the mind, which is why the Buddha's path of practice is called the middle path. So it's actually interesting. I was just talking with Curtis on the way over here, and we got to talking about Rome. He's reading a book about Rome, and I kind of had a real kind of love of history, and thought Rome was a really neat thing to study. And I actually only read kind of one book on it, but really enjoyed that book. And one of the interesting things in Rome was that when Rome as an empire was kind of expanding, they had these kind of very strong virtues. And kind of one of these virtues, there was this virtue of dignity. They called it dignitas. In other words, a sense like, okay, I'm going to prove my worth. I've got this dignity. I'm a special person. And so then you would get these various kind of generals. It was a republic at that time. People would vote. You'd have senators, and they get voted in, I guess. A lot of them were aristocrats. But, or did they get voted in? Did they just get
They got voted in by the rich people.
Oh, they got voted in by the rich people. The rich people could vote for them. And they got in. And then with these aristocratic senators, you'd have these generals that came from the aristocratic classes. And these kind of generals, they would compete with each other because of their dignity. And they'd have this kind of dignity, like, I want to be the best general. And you come back to Rome if you conquered some new territory, and people would treat you really well, and you'd be really rich because you just conquered some other territory and took all their stuff. So there's a lot of kind of dignity in this. But of course, with this kind of ideal of dignity and competition, when people start to compete, what you eventually want is to really win. Right? Kind of this, there's a dynamic tension to competition. There's a point where it's beneficial on a social level and produces kind of good results where people compete with each other in a spirit of fair play, and society wins because the best qualities come to the fore, the best merit comes to the fore. But eventually a point comes when this ideal of dignity, this ideal of pride, this ideal of independence reaches a tipping point, and at a certain point somebody just wants to win. You kind of, don't really want this dynamic tension between generals that's balanced by an elected government. You just want to win. That's where dignity ends. It keeps going. So at a certain point in the Roman Republic, a man named Julius Caesar arose, and he was an extremely talented man, very kind of skilled person. I actually use this word talented now. He had many talents. I think he even wrote a book on Latin grammar. That was a really good grammar book. He wrote kind of commentaries on his wars. that became standard for Western education for quite a long time. I think people would read them in schools. But he was also kind of very, what do you call it, kind of prideful man. And kind of things were kind of beneath his dignity. So he got stationed to look after this province that was next to France, which is known as Gaul at that time. And instead of just looking after his province, he sent his troops out into the middle of where he knew these people were going to come, and they ran into him, and he's like, "We got attacked!" And then he went and basically conquered Gaul after that, which is a very kind of bloody series of wars. Some of the things that happen in wars are very atrocious, kind of a lot of children getting killed and this kind of thing. But it was all because of his dignity, this kind of dignity of his, this independence toppled him. And in the end, there came a point where the Senate had just had enough of him, and they said, "Okay, look, you're under arrest," something like that, "come back to Rome." And there was this traditional boundary of Rome that was called the Rubicon, this kind of river. And I think he had to get permission from the Senate or something before crossing that boundary with an army. And so there was always this kind of understanding, look, you don't cross the Rubicon without an army. And so they called him back, and he got to thinking, well, should I cross this and attack Rome or shouldn't I? And then there was this point where he decided to cross the Rubicon. And so that's where this famous saying comes from, the die is cast. He said the die is cast, and he crossed the Rubicon and conquered Rome and fought with another man named Pompey and eventually became kind of first king of Rome. And the first emperor of Rome was his adopted son. So this ideal of dignity that got applied, that was good to a certain point, eventually actually ended up toppling the Roman Republic, ushered in an age of emperors. And this age of emperors actually barely conquered any new territory. Kind of after that, Rome just kind of stayed more or less within its boundaries. And this quality of dignity got over-applied. And by the end of the Roman Empire, this quality of dignity had led the Romans to become so degenerate that, you wouldn't tell people what they did in the Colosseum. It was just terrible, There was actually nothing to compare to it now. It was kind of, very kind of, it's really weird, to be honest. Their morals had really declined to a terrible point. And at the end of their empire, they couldn't fend off a kind of barbarian force that just wanted to come and live there. This force just totally toppled them, and they sacked Rome. They totally lost their strength, largely because of this, possibly because of this quality of dignity. Just kept going and going. People kept getting bigger and bigger heads, and Rome kept getting conquered and conquered by more and more Romans, more and more generals, and to the point where they couldn't sustain. So all these qualities, this quality of kind of independence, this quality of competition, these are things that need to be balanced in a kind of society and also in our own minds. One of the important balances that traditionally there is for this quality of dignity, this quality of that quality tends to go with things like effort, with willpower. These are also wholesome qualities, but one of its traditional balances is this quality of respect. In other words, there's this idea that we're not just here because of our own wonderful qualities. In other words, basically, we're made up. What we have right now is a result of things that many people have given to us. There's people who have deliberately gone out of their way to help us. There's people who have helped us at critical junctures in our life. And without these people, we wouldn't be here. One of these people are our parents. It's kind of the very first people who help us. And actually, I know there was a trend for a while. Sometimes can be a bit harsh on parents, like, okay, my mom didn't do this or that for me. But there's one teacher who makes the point. He's like, look, your parents, they didn't have to have you. We get everything from them. We get language from them. Kind of goes by the wayside. We wouldn't be talking without our parents. There's kids who kind of disappear into the woods when they're young. And if they don't learn to speak at a critical juncture, it's very difficult for them to speak after that. Kind of very difficult for them to learn to converse, learn normal social skills. All this comes from our parents. And then there's other things too. There's our teachers in school who helped us. Yes, they're salaried people, and they're people who are paid to do this, but all the skills that we have, kind of math, basic things, reading, writing, they all come from these people. They all come from their efforts to help us, their efforts to teach us. And then there's the material things which we own as well. material things which we use. Everything from the shirt on our back to the microphone that I'm speaking into to the cushion that I'm sitting on. Actually, I didn't make any of these things. None of these things were made by me. Most of them were made in China now, but it wasn't always that way. But in any event, these people who have made these things, these people work in cooperation with us, through a money economy, basically. If we were at war, we wouldn't get these things from China. We wouldn't get these things from other places. So reflecting on these things in this way, reflecting on the people who've helped us, reflecting on the things that we didn't make ourselves that had to be given to us, what this tends to do is lower our feeling of dignity, lower our feeling of pride. Now, of course, that can get too low too. Can get to a point where people, just always thinking about what other people do for them. Sometimes people start to have this sense of worthlessness to themselves, like, I can't do anything, everything's coming from other people. But actually, it's good to have a balance about this. When we have this kind of attitude, like there's other people who've helped me, all these things come from other people, this lowers our sense of pride. What then tends to happen is that the world around us becomes a brighter place. Actually, if we're the most important thing in the world, kind of everything comes from me, I'm the, I got this on? Oh, where'd my microphone go? I actually forgot to put this on. But I think people can hear me anyway. If everything comes from me, I'm the kind of top dog in the room, I'm the one who's won all the competitions, I'm the one who people should pay attention to. What that means is that what we're actually doing is building a perception where the things around us are kind of crappy. Like we're the kind of best thing, all of a sudden all the things around us are kind of pretty bad. This is what comes from dignity. It comes from an over-application of pride. I'm the kind of greatest guy in the room. Well, the room must not be that great. All the other people in the room must not be that great. And then what happens as a result of that is that a person's world actually becomes dark. Can become a kind of dark place to live in. The things that are actually really excellent, really amazing, just become normal. And then when there's a very slight change in these things that are normal, kind of a person has a 3-bedroom house and it seems like a normal thing to have a 3-bedroom house, and suddenly they lose their job and they're forced to downgrade to a 2-bedroom condo. It seems like this terrible loss. Like, oh my God, I'm in a 2-bedroom condo. What am I going to do with all my stuff? This is the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. I've now. It's terrible, actually. To lose a house is very sad. But it's when you think about it in perspective. If a person takes this quality of dignity and lowers it, thinking to themselves often, look, this house that I have right here, this house came together as a result of numbers of causes and conditions. It's there as a result of my job. I have a mortgage for this house. I actually don't own it. The bank owns it at this point. And this house is subject to disappearing. If I lose my job, then this house goes with it. If I lose my health, I lose my job, this house goes with it as well. Now what this can sound like is a kind of depressing reflection, but what it actually does, it lowers our sense of self in regards to our house. So this house is no longer something I own. In other words, this kind of dignity, this conceit actually comes first. This is the interesting thing in the suttas, from this thought, I am the thinker. In other words, we create a sense of self for ourselves, and then that self has to have possessions. It's got to have things that it owns, So then you've got all these kind of ornaments to a sense of self. I've got this house that's mine. I've got this room that's mine. I've got these skills that are mine. I've got these qualities that are mine. I'm the big guy in the room, I'm the big guy in the Roman Empire. Have all these kind of accoutrements. These kind of things become part of ourself, and then if we lose them, it feels like we're losing a part of ourself. Lose our house is like losing an arm. Right? Of course, we didn't have that house always. There was a time we didn't have the house. Lose our ability to walk. That's a kind of terrible thing. And of course, we didn't always have the ability to walk. And our body is subject to losing the ability to walk. So this is why the Buddha has us apply these kind of counterintuitive perceptions. One of them being this kind of perception of impermanence. Look, all these things that I think are mine, they're actually subject to leaving me. So he has us apply these other counterintuitive, maybe counterintuitive in an independent culture perceptions. Look, all these things that come to me, they're a result of things that other people have done. Many of them are. Yeah? So then when we apply these things, what tends to happen is that we stop taking the things around us for granted. They're no longer things that we deserve. They're there because of causes and conditions, and it's really great that we have them. So the ironic thing about this, the thing that's a paradox about this, is that sometimes reflecting in this way, elevating other people over ourselves, When people give us praise, we deflect it. We instead deflect that to another person. Well, okay, that's fine, but I was able to do that because of this person. I was able to do that because of this help. Now, it might have been partially because of us, but what that tends to do is it lowers our mind in that situation. And when our mind is low, we're looking up at things, everything looks really high. The people around us look really high. They look really great. Tend to appreciate them more. The world around us starts to look like a brighter place. It looks like a happier place. This is the kind of thing that comes from the application of respect. The application of this idea that, look, I've been helped by other people. So as a monk, whenever you come to a temple for the first time, whenever you come into a temple as a monk, you go and find the senior monk and you bow to them. It's the first thing you do. You bow to them 3 times. That's what you would do to an emperor. And if there's any monk who's senior to you, you bow to them. It doesn't matter if you like them or not. Whether it's, if there's one monk who's an arahant, he's finished the Buddhist path, and there's another monk who is one day senior to him, but he's not an arahant, that monk who's junior would bow to the monk who's senior, out of respect for the fact that that person's being ordained longer. So this quality of respect is something that holds things together. When this is the case, it actually lowers the feeling of competition that people have towards one another. This feeling of competition also breeds mistrust. I was talking to a friend of mine who we went to school together and hadn't seen him for many years, actually. And then was one of these kind of ironic meetups where I was talking to another friend of mine who I kept in touch with after university. And we were talking, oh yeah, so how's so-and-so going? I wouldn't say his name in a kind of public setting. And then, lo and behold, I was walking on the underground path where I love to walk. I actually met you and there was my friend, kind of just showed up. And so we got together for a tea, and what he said was he ended up in a kind of headhunting job. And he said, this is a very kind of ruthless industry, He said, you're basically evaluated on the basis of a dollar figure. There's your name, there's a bunch of people's name on a board, and beside your name is this kind of dollar figure. And he said, people will do things to the other people they work with to try to get the higher dollar figure. So what ends up happening is you don't trust the people you live with. You feel like these people, if you were in a tricky situation, a difficult situation, they wouldn't help you. Actually, they'd be happy. When they see you falling, maybe they'd, throw another dagger in your back or something like that, But actually, the world doesn't have to be this way. People's relationships with one another don't have to be this way. Because one of the amazing things about this is that we tend to think when we show respect to other people, when they see that weakness in us, they're going to take advantage of us. But the amazing thing is that when we show other people respect, actually the opposite things tend to happen. They show respect to us. It's something visceral. It's something you can feel. And this is the case even in Western culture. Even in a culture that's competitive, when people notice that we respect them, that we're looking for their good qualities, when people who have helped us, who have done things for us, when they see that we're acknowledging them, that we have a sense of gratitude to them, what they want to do is help us more. And then we want to help them. Even in our friendships, when we have friends, when our friends see that we're basically out for their goodwill, that we want good things to happen to them, then they tend to reciprocate. And the friends that don't reciprocate, eventually those friendships fall away. And so what you're left with after all this, with a constant application of respect, is a world that's bright. Kind of paradoxical thing. You won't necessarily cross the Rubicon paying respects. You won't necessarily cast the die, won't necessarily conquer Rome. But even if you conquer Rome, even if a person rules over Rome, if they're the best thing in Rome, Rome doesn't seem that great. The marble seems normal, the wealth seems normal, the power seems normal, and any change in it is terrible. But with this quality of respect, people living in very humble circumstances even, their world is bright. Being the emperor of Rome, you have to have a guard. It's kind of Praetorian guard. But a person whose life, whose relationships are imbued with this quality of respect, they don't need a guard. The people around them guard them in the same way that they guard other people. Even if they're living in a kind of humble situation, paying respects to these people who've helped them, those people start to seem like really great people. Then even when one sees those people, one becomes happy. Their world becomes bright. So this is a good quality that's possible to keep in mind, this quality of respect. Going out of one's way to show respect, to show gratitude to the people who've helped a person. Bringing these people up into mind frequently, very often. Look what my mother did for me. Look what my father did for me. Look what my teachers did for me. These are good people. These are people who help me. When one does these kind of things, one's mind becomes bright. When one's mind becomes bright, one's mind becomes calm. When a person's mind is calm, then joy arises. And when a person's mind is joyous, that's when their meditation starts to go well. That's when their meditation starts to be easy. That's when some of the things that the teachers teach start to manifest for people in their meditation. It doesn't come from trying to out-meditate our neighbor. It comes from these wholesome qualities that we plant and water and grow until they bear fruit. They bear the fruit of the things that the Buddha taught. And there's no fruit that's better than this.